So I kind of want to begin by saying that I'm actually ashamed to admit this, but sometimes here in our bubble, in the heart of imperialism, it is easy for us to forget the struggles raging on across the colonized world. Sometimes it's even easy to lose hope that there will ever be anything but exploitation and imperialism. Here we're in the heart of imperialism, in the very heart of this bestial machine whose gears are oiled with the blood of the third world. And we think, how could this beast ever be felled? We think and we forget. We forget the truth about all the people who are actually resisting occupation right now. I've been at a number of events in the city, rallies, marches here and there. We had a protest to prevent eviction of the marginalized and exploited peoples of the downtown east side of Vancouver. We had a rally to speak out against the racist and vile ban that the madman in the White House instituted against Muslims. We had a march to tell the government here that we would not tolerate another invasion of a sovereign state in the Middle East. And each time there was perhaps a few hundred people, mostly a motley crew, some of the most marginalized, the people who have been cast out or crushed by the systems upon systems of imperialism and patriarchy and racism that hold up the primacy of the rich and the white. And to the vast masses of imperialist West, these people who had gathered at each of these events were but the last few resistors who hold on to a dead school of thought. The idea that there could ever be anything but capitalism, but US hegemony, but neoliberalism. Look, they would say, these powerful people up top, the Soviets are gone and with them the primacy of capitalism has been proven. The days of mass mobilization are over. No more thousands upon thousands poured out to resist war as they did in the days of Vietnam. Across the West, an era of neo-fascism has come with Trump and Le Pen and all the others, and even in those places where the far right has not taken power, the champions of neoliberalism, Trudeau and Macron and Merkel, reign supreme. There is no alternative, they say. There is no resistance. They would say that and they would think that, and sometimes even I would think, what hope is there? What is there that stands in the way of the final triumph of exploitation? And as I thought that, I looked at the crowds and saw what actually was there. There, in each of these events and across the world, some of the most marginalized, most oppressed people come from places where the legacy of resistance is still strong. They come from places that are still yet to bow. I thought that and I thought, they say the days of resistance are over, but they haven't looked across the world. Here, in the heart of imperialism, sometimes we feel alone, but we only need to look to see how strong we actually are. Cuba still stands strong. The Zapatistas in Mexico still resist. In Standing Rock, the indigenous peoples stood strong against those who had built pipelines across their land. There are nations across this globe still resisting the imperialist beast. China still stands strong. Vietnam is still socialist. Korea still stands proud. There are folk dying in Syria determined to not let the imperialists tear the nation apart. In Palestine, the people are unbowed. Look at Kerala or other parts of India. Look at the Naxalbari or look at Nepal. And today here we are, standing, celebrating, standing in solidarity with another link of an unbroken chain of resistance and revolution that's stretched across the world, a chain that's choking imperialism slowly yet surely. The agents of imperialism would like to keep us apart. Here in Vancouver, they would like us to pretend, or they would like us to forget that our struggles against poverty and homelessness are part of a global struggle for liberty and revolution. Here, we would be made to forget that it is capitalism that still displaces people in the very heart of the imperialist West. Vancouver is a prime example of this. Vancouver is a prime example of the crimes of capitalism. The downtown east side, the protests and the resistance there, is it not part of the same struggle? How about Chinatown, where people are fighting tooth and nail to prevent their homes being taken away from them in the interest of corporate greed and interests of white supremacy? We know that is all the doing of capitalism. We know that is the legacy of imperialism and racism. Are the people here that are most affected by the greed and hunger of capitalism also not people of color? Are they also not indigenous peoples? This entire city was built on stolen ground. This entire city, to its foundations, is unlawful, built on the unceded Coast Salish territories. And the poverty of the downtown east side, the poverty of Vancouver, it's all part of the legacy of capitalism, the forceful displacement of the peoples who this land rightfully belongs to. The housing crisis, the homelessness crisis, the fentanyl crisis, these are all not separate crises, but they are just a continuation of the centuries-year-old war of global capitalism, the war that global capitalism has been waging against the indigenous peoples of the world. It is a continuation of the genocidal policies the Canadian state employed against indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, and it is one arm of the beast that would also oppress and exploit the people of Negros Island, just like it is but one of the examples of the genocides and land thefts and occupations in Palestine, in the wider Middle East, in Africa, in Asia, all over the globe. When we fight here, when we resist here, when we stand with the impoverished peoples of the downtown east side, when we stand with the indigenous peoples fighting for the land here against the brutal Canadian state, when we fight for housing, when we fight against poverty, when we fight as working class people, as people of color, we must also be, and we are also standing with the people of Negros Island and all the peoples of the globe, all the oppressed peoples of the globe, for it's the same beast we are fighting. We must remember it is not disparate struggles we are waging, but we are engaged all together in one battle for a collective liberation. The people of Negros Island, as we've learned tonight, have taken power in their own hands, and while they may be one island and one island chain and one ocean, they are not alone. They are a manifestation of the people's power to resist. They are one of the many arms of the army of the people that stretched from ocean to ocean, and when they resist, they are resisting with thousands of others, millions of others, all together determined to carve out a new world from the ashes of the old. They stand, and with them we stand together, not as a few hundred people at the protests and rallies in Vancouver, or not even as a crowd gathered here, or as the people of Palestine separately, and the people of Korea separately, and the people of Turtle Island, and the people of the Philippines, but rather one people, one united people formed of peasants and workers and people of color together against white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism and colonialism and imperialism. Revolution will come, and it will come from the people of color, the people who have been most exploited across the globe, and those who are resisting at Negros Island we see as the seeds of this revolution that will one day sweep the planet. Because look at how many millions of people are standing all together in so many different corners of the globe. So I said, sometimes we here in the belly of the imperialist beasts may think it's impossible to resist. Sometimes we fight and struggle against all the tentacles of the beast and think, how could this monster ever be felled? The Soviets are gone, the days of mass mobilization are over. Across the West, the narrative of neo-fascism has come, and even though those places where the far right has not taken power, the champions of neoliberalism reign supreme. And then we have to remember, and we remember the resistance of the people of the Negros Island. If it is possible there, if it is possible for those people to resist, then we must also be following in their footsteps. They are the vanguard, and we stand with them. We follow them, and we support them. If they, in that corner of the world that here in the imperialist West, the powers that be would rather forget, if they can stand strong and proud and say no more to the beast of imperialism, then we can also join our voices in the cry of liberation. They are the vanguard, and we stand with them. They are not alone. They are not forgotten. They are at the forefront of the army of the people. Today, the chief imperialist, the beast that props the military state that's committing all its crimes there, ensures the continuation of capitalism across the globe, is, of course, that monster, the United States of America. Those who have given their lives in the movement here across the globe in Negros Islands have their names remembered on that longest and saddest of lists, the list of all the victims of the monstrous American regimes. We must remember who our chief enemy is, the one who ensures the continued death of millions across the globe. And it is to them, the Americans, that I decided that I wanted to end this by reading a poem and trying to remember the brave people reclaiming their land, fighting for their land, fighting for agrarian reform as I do so. So without further ado, here's a poem by Emmanuel Ortiz. Some of you may know, but no matter how many times I hear this poem, it never loses its power. Before I begin this poem, I'd like to ask you to join me in a moment of silence in honor of those who died in the World Trade Center in the Pentagon on September 11th, 2001. I would also like to ask you to offer up a moment of silence for all those who have been harassed, imprisoned, disappeared, tortured, raped, or killed in retaliation for those strikes, for the victims in Afghanistan, Iraq, in the US, and throughout the world. And if I could add just one more thing, a full day of silence for the tens of thousands of Palestinians who have died at the hands of the US-backed Israeli forces over decades of occupation. 6 months of silence for the 1.5 million Iraqi people, mostly children, who have died of malnourishment and starvation as a result of a 12-year US embargo against the country. And now the drums of war beat again. Before I begin this poem, 2 months of silence for the blacks under apartheid in South Africa, where Homeland Security made them aliens in their own country. 9 months of silence for the dead of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where death rained down and peeled back every layer of concrete, steel, earth, and skin, and the survivors went on as if alive. A year of silence for the millions of dead in Vietnam, a people, not a war, for those who know a thing or two about the scent of burning fuel, their relatives' bones buried in it, their babies born of it. 2 months of silence for the decades of dead in Colombia, whose names, like the corpses they once represented, have piled up and slipped off our tongues. Before I begin this poem, 7 days of silence for El Salvador, a day of silence for Nicaragua, 5 days of silence for the Guatemaltecos, none of whom ever knew a moment of peace in their living years. 45 seconds of silence for the 45 dead at Actiel, Chiapas. 1,933 miles of silence for every desperate body that burns in the desert sun, drowned in swollen rivers at the pearly gates to the empire's underbelly. A gaping wound sutured shut by razor wire and corrugated steel. 25 years of silence for the millions of Africans who found their graves far deeper in the ocean than any building could poke in the sky. For those who are strung and swung from the heights of sycamore trees, in the south, the north, the east, the west. There will be no DNA testing or dental records to identify their remains. 100 years of silence for the hundreds of millions of indigenous peoples from this half of right here, whose land and lives were stolen in postcard-perfect plots like Pine Ridge, Wounded Knee, Sand Creek, Fallen Timbers, or the Trail of Tears. Names now reduced to innocuous magnetic poetry under the refrigerator of our consciousness. From somewhere within the pillars of power, you open your mouths to invoke a moment of our silence, and we are all left speechless, our tongues snatched from our mouths, our eyes stapled shut. A moment of silence, and the poets are laid to rest. The drums disintegrate into dust. Before I begin this poem, you want a moment of silence? You mourn now as if the rest of the world will never be the same, and the rest of us hope to hell it won't be, not like it always has been, because this is not a 9/11 poem, this is a 9/10 poem, a 9/9 poem, a 9/8 poem, a 9/7 poem, this is a 1492 poem, this is a poem about what causes poems like this to be written. If this is a 9/11 poem, then this is a September 11th, 1973 poem for Chile. This is a September 12th, 1977 poem for Stephen Biko in South Africa. This is a September 13th, 1971 poem for the brothers at Attica Prison, New York. This is a September 14th, 1992 poem for the brothers for the people of Somalia. This is a poem for every date that falls to the ground amidst the ashes of amnesia. This is a poem for the 110 stories that were never told, the 110 stories that history uprooted from the textbooks, the 110 stories that CNN, BBC, the New York Times, and Newsweek ignored. This is a poem for interrupting this program. This is not a peace poem. This is not a poem for forgiveness. This is a justice poem, a poem for never forgetting. This is a poem to remind us that all that glitters might just be broken glass. And still they want a moment of silence for the dead? We could give them lifetimes of empty, the unmarked graves, the lost languages, the uprooted trees and histories, the dead stares on the faces of nameless children. Before I start this poem, we could be silent forever, or just long enough to hunger for the dust to bury us, and you would still ask us for more of our silence. So if you want a moment of silence, then stop the oil pumps, turn off the engines, the televisions, sink the cruise ships, crash the stock markets, unplug the marquee lights, delete the emails and instant messages, derail the trains, ground the planes. If you want a moment's silence, put a brick through the window of Taco Bell and pay the workers for wages lost. Tear down the liquor stores, the townhouses, the White Houses, the jailhouses, the penthouses, and the Playboys. If you want a moment of silence, then take it on Super Bowl Sunday, the 4th of July, during Dayton's 13-hour sale. The next time your white guilt fills the room where my beautiful brown people have gathered. You want a moment of silence? Then take it now, before this poem begins. Here, in the echo of my voice, in the pause between goose steps of the second hand, in the space between bodies in embrace. Here is your silence. Take it all. Take it all, but don't cut in line. Let your silence begin at the beginning of the crime. And we will keep right on singing for our dead. We will remember the people of Negros Island. We stand with you. We stand with you all.